This phone always trending. So, I'll just ask them, Android or iPhone? I'm not trying to start a war. I just want to ask a question. Let's see. Single everyone, I'm here, and I appreciate you being here with me. There's a few things I'm gonna cover today. Tonight. It's late. Regardless, if you're seeing this late, you know to skip up to this part. Skip through this part and just jump straight to the video. Without delay, I'm gonna start it as soon as we finish the countdown. second home right there. Kentucky, Kansas City, Tulsa, Oklahoma, Alabama, Long Island, Mississippi, South Carolina, Manassas, Virginia, North Carolina, Massachusetts, Louisiana, Vinny, Louisiana. Hope I pronounced that right. Sacramento, California, Austin, Texas. Let's go. We about to get started. To watch all of my exclusive content not featured here on my channel, log on to my website at imjustheretomake-you-think.com/films. Two. Yep. Here we go. Okay. Make sure everything good. My level's looking good. Oh, see you everyone. Thank you for joining me. This evening, what we're gonna do is go over some things. And a couple of topics came up that's dealing with how Black Americans lost their lands. I went over this before, but I wanted to, go over it live, like one of the videos where I presented it. Now I have to present two videos in order for you to understand what this is fully about. And I'm going to break down the parts that I think needs a better explanation, maybe, possibly. We'll see. So 1 second, let me flip to the second page. Okay, so I skipped up in this video here because it's not necessarily, I just want you to pinpoint the information that I'm presenting, okay, to explain this title, how Black Americans lost their lands by becoming voters. And I'm going to break this down, okay? It's, completely. So I'm going to be playing two videos. So I'm going to flip from this one and then another one. So let's turn your volume up. What do you mean? I'm up, right? Yeah. I'm not peeking. Can everybody hear me? Let me before I get started. Are we good? You can hear me? Volume is low. Okay, so I turned it up some more. How about now? Okay, good. Loud and clear. All right, now let me know if and don't troll me and tell me that it's low. Like, tell me for real, because I'm really trying to make adjustments on the fly. And but I appreciate that. Like, but let me know if this video is low for you guys that I'm about to play. If it is, then I'll just start, because I'm starting right at the part where I want you guys to really focus in on this information.
Ever since we began to see people like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X appearing on national media stations and television programs alike, protesting and campaigning for many call to action purposes, you would see those same tactics utilized today, but in a much more provocative sense. And here's what I mean by that. Protesting and marching and the consistent need to vote for a political representative was assembled and heavily campaigned by both parties of the political spectrum. And the copper-colored people were manipulated into believing that their vote will count towards something positive for their own benefit, and things will be changed for the better good for their community's sake. But that promise has been made over and over and over again. And look at what happens. You see how your voice doesn't count when it comes to yelling for justice, right? Now, just ask yourself, why would you believe that your vote counts as if it'll actually change anything for the better? Think history isn't telling you otherwise? Now, we can recall learning in school about how our ancestors were not allowed the right to vote until the passing of the 15th Amendment, which was ratified February 3rd, 1870. And according to the National Archives and Records Administration, on pages 61 and 62 of the milestone documents of 1995, the so-called Negroes, quote, exercised the franchise and held office in many southern states through the 1880s. But in the early 1890s, steps were taken to ensure subsequent white supremacy. Literacy tests for the vote, grandfather clauses, excluding from the franchise all whose ancestors had not voted in the 1860s, and other devices to disenfranchise African Americans were written into the constitutions of former Confederate states.
Okay, so there's a few things here. Okay, this was pretty deep right here. And I didn't want this to fly past at all. This has to be explained. Remember when I was telling you guys that they implemented white supremacy in the 1890s? Okay, now okay, I'm going to explain in this video what that means, but this automatically lets you know that we were in office. Okay, we exercised the franchise and held office in many southern states. Now, that's even prior to the 1880s, by the way. That's going back to 1850s, 1860s. So I'm pointing out what happened, okay? And I need you guys to focus on that. I'm pointing out when it happened and what happened, in order for us to not only lose our lands, but it's just our property in general. Like, our power, And that's what I need you guys to focus on. But let me keep going.
Steps were taken to ensure subsequent white supremacy. Literacy tests for the vote, grandfather clauses, excluding from the franchise all whose ancestors had not voted in the 1860s, and other devices to disenfranchise African Americans were written into the constitutions of former Confederate states. End quote. I would like for you to note this portion of the quote where it says, exercised the franchise and held office in many southern states. Because this is how you know that our ancestors were prospering as capitalists in this society during this time period, being as though they were able to run businesses, create franchises, hold elections, and office as a franchisor. Each business can elect one who is chosen, or they may select one who is handpicked to take an office or employment, meaning that the business can either elect or select its president, vice president, secretary, or treasurer, just to name a few things as an example. But somehow this phrase was merged into moving from business to more of a political sense.
Pay attention to
the
this
point
part
where
right
the
here.
definition of franchise is now being associated with both the right to vote in public elections and an authorization granted by a government or company to an individual or group, enabling them to carry out specified commercial activities. With the franchisor being the person or company that grants a franchise, and the franchisee being the person or company doing business under the name or mark of another franchise. It is an elaborate agreement under which the franchisee does business in accordance with methods and procedures prescribed by the franchisor.
That should sound familiar. Right there. That should sound familiar right there. But I'm gonna stop stopping because I believe I go into it and I just don't want to repeat myself, but that's very important to please pay attention to. And then I'm going to be explaining who are these franchisors and franchisees. And that's very important, guys. You got to understand what happened to us. Pay attention.
A collective bargaining agreement should ring a bell here, which is nothing more than a legal binding contract. I share more about that here. Those of you that might not know, for starters, collective bargaining is the process of negotiating the terms of employment between an employer and a group of promising employees. A collective bargaining agreement is a formally written, legally enforceable contract that could be valid up until any written specified time period between the owner or equivalent decision makers of an organization and its employees represented by an independent trade union.
Now, that's also an indenture. It's a contract. It works the same way as it did when slavery existed. This is the reason why I keep telling you guys this is a form of employment. Okay? So you have to listen to what happened. Now, even if you don't believe me, you're going to know based on what happened. Okay, I'm going to get into that. I'm not going to take up too much of the time because I know that needs to be explained, and it will be explained. But I need you to focus on what I'm stating right here for very particular reasons. It's going to line right up.
Sounding familiar at all to you yet? Let's take things a step further. Listen closely. According to the 1828 Webster's English Language Dictionary, the noun bargain is defined as, quote, an agreement between parties concerning the sale of property, or a contract by which one party binds himself to transfer the right to some property for a consideration, and the other party binds himself to receive the property and pay the consideration. End quote. It goes on to say that the verb bargain means to make a contract or conclusive agreement, often with for before the thing purchased, as to bargain for a house. A bargained with B for his farm. End quote. So with all of that being said, we can determine that the CBA that's being held by the Indian child represents a binding labor contract, or also known as an indenture of servitude, which is known nowadays as an application for employment or a work for hire agreement. And what was this bargain, you ask? Well, who else was promised lots of things only once they have completed cultivating America from the ground up, like acres of land, for example, and they never received them? According to the International Franchise Association, under the title Foundations of Franchising, it states, quote, "Every franchise relationship is founded on the mutual commitment of both parties to fulfill their obligations under the franchise agreement. Each party will fulfill its obligations, will act consistently with the interests of the brand, and will not act as to harm the brand and system. This willing interdependence between franchisors and franchisees, and the trust and honesty upon which it is founded, has made franchising a worldwide success as a strategy for business growth." End quote. In which all of this should make you wonder, could it be possible that once a person signs up to vote, then that individual has now consented to entering into a legal binding contract? Inadvertently?
Listen.
Mr. Carmichael, do you see any change in atmosphere in the South? Do you think that we are approaching a more militant or revolutionary stage in the civil rights movement in the South?
Yes, I certainly think so. I think we're moving now into a political arena. And I think that what Negroes are now tampering in, what they're tampering with, will touch the entire country. To be very precise, for example, many Negroes who have registered to vote have been evicted from their lands in Lowndes County. People who have worked on plantations for 35, 40 years because they've registered to vote have been evicted. So that raises a philosophical question, not only for us, but for the whole country. Can property-less people be made as equal as property owners through the vote?
A legal binding contract that purposely removes certain constitutional rights away from you, that in turn forces an individual to fulfill obligations and act consistently with the interests of the brand that they choose or were forced to do business with. This is uncommonly known as the evolution of slavery, since steps were taken in the early 1890s to ensure subsequent white supremacy by the formal use of devices like literacy tests and grandfather clauses to ensure the disenfranchisement of the American Indians as young children. The word devices is used here.
I said a lot right there. They had to do it to the children because the children weren't able to create their or have their own property. So there was a loophole that they used in order to enslave or employ the children. That's how you know that the majority of the slaves were children. They were not able to do that with most of the adults. Now, some of the adults did it with their own children. They employed their own children and other people's children, especially if they were owners of land, whatever, plantation, you pick it. reservation, ghetto, public housing, labor camps. That's what it turned into. Gentrification, urban removal, urban renewal. This is lining up, guys. I cleaned this up, okay? You need to listen to what I'm saying. I cleaned this up. I found out where it was. This is what happened. This is how they took it. I'm not gonna get rowdy. Let me back up a little bit.
This is uncommonly known as the evolution of slavery, since steps were taken in the early 1890s to ensure subsequent white supremacy by the formal use of devices like literacy tests and
and don't you dare say that I don't put up no documents, I don't put up no research, I don't tell you where I'll get it from. Don't you dare. I'm not playing with y'all.
grandfather clauses to ensure the disenfranchisement of the American Indians as young children. The word devices is used here in reference to a plan or a scheme or some type of trick with a particular aim. Literacy tests is being tied to voting only, but during the 1890s, you saw the establishment of HBCUs, and the literacy test became a mandatory requisite in order to achieve an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree.
Hold on. This is very important. I'm letting you know that the HBCUs came later. Way later. They were already there, though. So that lets you know that these owners ain't who you think they are. And they want you to put your money towards it. There's another video I'm going to do on that.
As an example, in which this piece of paper acknowledges just how much of an excellent worker or employee you have gradually become.
That's what happened.
So the question remains,
that's what your degrees
exactly are the franchisers? And then while we're at it, who exactly are the franchisees? Looking back at it all now, you may recall noticing that during each presidential election, from Abraham Lincoln and beyond, substantial amounts of precedents will arise, conveniently aligning with the time period given to cast your votes in for the next president. These precedents will take place in order to capture the attention of one's mindset by moving the individual emotionally to the point where whatever precedents took place and was heavily promoted by the media to the public, it eventually propels one's decision to act in emergency response to that precedent, driving the individual straight to the polls in order to emotionally cast their votes in as the end result. I'll give you an example here that you would least expect to be one. Taking it back to the time period when the phrase Black Power was initially used.
We want Black Power. We want Black Power. We want Black Power.
That's going to make
sense
sense
that
later.
were living throughout the North and especially the southernmost regions of America, aka Turtle Island, all fell victim to unprecedented acts of racial discrimination, especially when it came to regaining political powers they once had on a congressional level during the late 1870s. The 15th Amendment was ratified during the year 1870, which prohibited the states from denying any male U.S. citizen the right to vote based on, quote, race, color, or previous condition of servitude. However, by the time the Neeji sought to fill up those newly created political vacancies, particular people associated with the Dixiecrats, or rather known as the Democrats, conducted devious tactics against the Neejis, to say the least, to not only completely erase their reputations and representations in the political realm, but also icing their rights to vote against it all. by discounting their votes to just merely political jargon that eventually became campaign material or another form of entertainment over the years. So it wasn't until 95 years later when the initial Voting Rights Act was signed into law by then President Lyndon B. Johnson on August 6, 1965, that forced the state governments to finally participate with previously enacted federal laws that allowed for the so-called Negroes to have the right to vote. So now with this brand new allowance from the government finally afforded to the Neegies, both Republicans and the Democrats had to act fast with gaining the trust of the so-called Negro communities, and especially in the South. So what does a politician do when he or she wants to win an election with your votes? It's simple, really. They'll just play with your emotions.
I'm not making this up.
James Howard Meredith was the name used for a second time in American history to steer one's emotions into a false sense of needing some type of political emergency relief. The first time, then 29-year-old James Meredith was instructed by someone to attempt to desegregate the University of Mississippi by attending as a student during the year 1962. It was said to have led to a race riot, causing 2 unnamed deaths and some 160 US Marshals and 40 National Guardsmen were wounded somehow. But with multiple race riots occurring throughout this time period already, this particular precedent was regarded as, quote, a pivotal moment in history of civil rights in the US by the Department of Justice Project. James graduated in '63 with a degree in political science. He then continued his education all the way in Nigeria at the University of Ibadan. I could be mispronouncing that. Then he returned to the US 2 years later in 1965, and then out of nowhere, James Meredith randomly launches his March Against campaign, where he's back in the spotlight again for yet another political precedent. But this time around, the pot thickens, being as though he became a victim of an attempted murder, or so the story claims. During a very hot summer on the date of June 6, 1966, according to the National Archives, James Meredith set out to march from Memphis, Tennessee, some 220 miles straight to Jackson, Mississippi, with an African walking stick in one hand and a Bible in another, all by himself with nobody in attendance for support nor verification. But his goal was to, quote, inspire Negroes to register and go to the polls. But without any media presence, the internet, or any outcries of support for his cause, how difficult could it be for James Meredith to inspire people to go out and vote? It would be like trying to start a car on an empty tank. So that could only mean that a miracle must happen in order for people to even see what Meredith was attempting to do here.
Please pay attention here,
It was said that on the second day of his alleged one-man march, a very small group of unnamed people and a few journalists joined James just outside of Hernando, Mississippi. And a little after 4 p.m. during a hot summer afternoon,
notice how I got
2 photographers that just so happened to be sitting on the side of the road waiting for Coca-Cola to be delivered to them from a third photographer noticed James Meredith in their rearview mirror, marching up the side of the road behind them on the left side shoulder of US 51. According to documents held by the National Archives from the Department of Justice, a white male appeared on the scene by the name of Aubrey James Norvell, shouting out loud, "I just want James Meredith." Then he blasted a 12-gauge shotgun towards James, allegedly striking him in the head, neck, back, and leg. Contradicting reports claimed that he was shot by sniper bullets. And I must admit that it's great news, but it's also odd that he somehow survived. But besides all of that, how convenient was it for photographers and journalists to be there just in time to witness this entire precedent taking place?
I mean, I'm
and if
saying
things
in
can't
more ways
be any
than
more
one,
rendered, it was said that the shooter literally sat on the side of the road and waited patiently for the police to arrive and arrest him. Aubrey was sentenced to 5 years in prison, but 3 of those years were mysteriously waived for him. And with all of that being said, the miracle was achieved. Visual messages of James Meredith's scene, quote, ran in nearly every newspaper and magazine across the country. In one photo, Meredith screams out in pain from the blast of shotgun pellets torn into his back and head as he crawls across the highway, according to the Clarion Ledger. This exposes that the civil rights movement depended strictly on visual images for political effectiveness, which came with many pros and cons.
Listen.
And here's what I mean by that. In the book entitled For All the World to See, Visual Culture and the Struggle for Civil Rights, author Maurice Berger writes, quote, it was not just through political or legal writing, but also through compelling images that the civil rights movement altered perception about race and thus advanced the case of black legitimacy within white America.
All right, hold on. And the reason why I pointed this out is to let you guys know that that was also their way to integrate. Okay, that was like the first marker of us integrating into, you know, things that foreigners had. When we had our own, we didn't need to do that. Come on, man.
Photographs of the brutality, intensity, and exigency of Black Americans' struggle for racial equality appeared in great numbers in newspapers and magazines in the 1960s, the golden age of visual media in the country. White America could no longer ignore the ugliness of what was taking place. By placing the question of civil rights front and center, the mainstream press, intentionally or otherwise, forged a path through which this imagery could enter the minds and hearts of many Americans. And
that's another thing, guys. I do post books a lot, and if you go back in my documentaries and stuff like that, I tell you where I get my stuff. Write it down. Write it down. If you haven't, I strongly suggest you do. And you don't have to believe me. Do your own research on it. Period.
Quote, Republican Senator Jacob Jarvis of New York said, I know of nothing which has more keened the American people to the moral implications of the struggle for civil rights than the photographs which the American press and magazines have shown of actual events on the Southern Front. Political activism in the South led to political action in Washington. The 3 photographers that were on the scene were Vernon Merritt III, who was freelancing for Life magazine, veteran wire service photographers Jack Thornell and Sammy Parrish of United Press International and the Associated Press, along with news media reporter Tom Jarrell and cameraman Chuck Ferris of ABC News were all in attendance.
All public information,
All
baby.
of this media coverage was conveniently present for Meredith's one-man march to be presented to the public as breaking news, all just to stroke your emotions to make you register and vote.
All right, now hold up. We don't have
to. Everyone. So I take it that you are well versed on what part 1 of this segment has to offer. And all of what I'm pointing out here during this time period is very essential to note. when it comes to understanding why the so-called black vote has been discounted and undermined to the point where if the Negro shall decide to even go and register to vote under their own will, then there's a strong possibility that they may be evicted from their own lands and could possibly face losing their only means to make an income that allows them to provide for their families and maintain their farms.
Now, also, I'm going to point out the breach, okay? Because sooner or later, you're going to see more information coming from me about Martin Luther King, okay? I'm going to have to put it out. I see it's not out. I'm going to have to put it out. Okay? But right here, I'm pointing out how he was infiltrated once he became aware of the fact that our lands were stolen and he trusted the government with something that he shouldn't have. Let me keep going.
So let us begin things where we left off in part 1, where it was from this June 6, 1966, James Meredith precedent that provoked a young, aspiring civil rights activist by the name of Stokely Carmichael to finally have his opportunity to shine in the political spotlight on a national level. Stokely Standiford Churchill Carmichael was born June 29, 1941, in Port of Spain, Trinidad. Then he immigrated to the US in 1952 at the age of 11, where he briefly resided in Harlem, New York with both of his parents until they moved to Van Ness in East Bronx, New York, which was predominantly an Italian and Jewish immigrant neighborhood at that time. What is very important to note here is that Stokely Carmichael was a member of the Morris Park Dukes gang in East Bronx, New York, in which he was the only person of color accepted into this organized crime-related street gang. Keep in mind that this was at a time period where you may believe that racism ran rapid throughout America.
That's another thing.
So-called whites would be furiously opposed to working with so-called blacks in collaboration efforts. However, truthful history continues to prove otherwise.
I'm talking about it. Okay, at this time, you got to understand the time period, guys. Not everybody was experiencing racism. I have talked to many elders that would tell you that they were friends with white people and they were neighbors with white people. They were going to the grocery store with white people doing, they had them in their communities when they migrated here, okay? When their families migrated here, okay? You did not experience race, like I'm talking about in the 60s, guys. Listen to me, that's very important because they promoted this ideology as if the 60s was all about racism. And it wasn't, and it wasn't, and it wasn't. And they've been lying. They've been lying, I'm trying to tell you, they've been lying. This is to keep you off these lands, I'm trying to tell you.
Many people that shared various shades of the color brown and skin complexion did not share the same life experiences as some others may have in most southern and northern states of America. And like millions of others, Stokely was one of those children. And we can all agree that racism is not something that you are born with. Racism has to be taught to an individual. So, without a doubt, now you know that it works both ways.
That it works both ways. That means if the white folks got to teach their children about racism, so-called black folks gonna do the same thing. That's very important. Please.
In fact, it wasn't until Stokely's very first year of attending Howard University as a student in 1961 that he became aware of segregation and racial discrimination, sparking his interest in studying the already active civil rights movement with a few of his fellow classmates, undergoing discovery of all tricks of the trade. Stokely eventually joined the Nonviolence Action Group, which was the Howard campus affiliate of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC for short, where he studied under the guise of various other students of particular colleges and universities, like Diane Nash, for example, who also didn't experience racism during her childhood until she later became a college student.
Until she became a college student.
I had never traveled to the South at that time, and I didn't have an emotional relationship to segregation.
To segregation. Pay attention.
It's, you know, I understood the facts and the stories, but there was not the emotional relationship. When I actually went south and actually saw signs that said white and colored, and I actually could not drink out of that water fountain or go to that ladies' room, I had a real emotional reaction to that.
Diane Nash is one of the co-founders of SNCC, and she was also involved in the field operations of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, whereas Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was its president, and also one of the prominent leading influencers of the civil rights movement already underway.
Already underway. So you know I'm going to talk about that now, okay? You know, just get ready for that video. It is coming, and I know I may piss off a lot of people. I may piss off a lot of people.
A then 21-year-old Stokely Carmichael grew to have a different approach to tackling various politically driven issues of concern, in which many of these ways were looked down upon by his fellow colleagues who disagreed with disengaging from being moral supporters of nonviolence and loyalists to Dr. King. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was founded by a few young college students, like then 22-year-old Diane Nash of Howard University, and then 25-year-old Charles Frederick McDough of South Carolina State University, joining with then 57-year-old Ella Josephine Baker of Shaw University, just to name a few, in April of the year 1960.
Check out that logo.
Together,
1960.
they all nominated then 24-year-old Marion Berry of Fisk University to become the committee's very first chairman. And then the very next year, Berry was replaced by Charles McDough himself in 1961. And McDough held the chairman position until stepping down 2 years later. And then 23-year-old John Robert Lewis was elected chairman of SNCC in 1963. Now, by this time period, members of SNCC found themselves becoming victims of their own demise when it came to firm mutual agreements on various causes of some high-profile concerns within their own student committees.
They were infiltrated.
One of these concerns was that many of the students found themselves at odds with the old nonviolent approach that was heavily publicly promoted by various so-called black leaders, with Dr. King leading the charge. On the part of SNCC's involvement within these disagreements, they were mainly discussed, debated, and manifested by Stokely Carmichael himself, who was a field organizer of SNCC during this time period in 1963. In 1964, John Lewis was then forcefully removed as the chairman of SNCC due to Stokely Carmichael and his direct peers' disagreement with practicing nonviolence rather than self-defense, and the fact that John Lewis was too close of a friend to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
See, keep in mind, he was young, okay? Young. Martin Luther King was a little older. And that's why I got it. Nah, man, I'm bringing it out.
So the majority of SNCC members decided that Lewis should turn his back against Dr. King and his agenda.
Stokely Carmichael had you removed as the chairman of that committee. Why? Called SNCC.
It was called SNCC. It was called a SNCC, short, I guess, for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee of the Press. Doug was SNCC. And there was a feeling on the part of Stokely, Carmichael, and some other, that I was too close to Martin Luther King Jr., that I was too committed to the philosophy and discipline of nonviolence. They didn't think I was militant enough or radical enough. They wanted me to take on Martin Luther King Jr., take on Lyndon Johnson as president. I disagreed with President Johnson on many things, but I was not going to get in a name-calling process or thing with
there was a plant there trying to infiltrate, trying to get people to stop dealing with Martin Luther King.
I was on his board, the board of SDLC.
Because
he was
Martin
my
Luther
leader.
King
He was my hero.
He was supposed to be on the script, and he flipped it.
The role as a participant. I didn't see myself as some great
I'm pointing
leader.
out this infiltration.
I saw myself as one of the participants in the civil rights movement.
After successfully removing John Lewis as chairman, Stokely Carmichael was then elected as the new chairman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in 1964 at the age of 23. And as you can tell by John Lewis's own account here, there was a lot of tension between the college students of SNCC and SCLC and many other parties involved that I'll get into more detail here soon enough. Once Stokely became the chairman of SNCC in 1964, he quickly realized that he needed to stick with Dr. King and his political motives, agendas, and participation in various precedents that Dr. King involved himself in. All just to gain the attention of Dr. King's viewers, listeners, supporters, and media presence. And here's what I mean by that. Just as well as the other college students who participated in the civil rights organizations they created, Stokely Carmichael was one of those college students who participated with influencing numerous people of color to go and register to vote. And he was also determined to be the very first person to popularize the phrase Black Power on national media, by sticking to Dr. King's side in particular whenever the media is present. And he casually speaks in response to Dr. King on most occasions, standing against Dr. King's beliefs, pledges, opinions, and his overall agenda. Upon close examination of Dr. King's facial expression, we can determine that Stokely was upsetting him, but Dr. King still managed to not lose focus.
What do you mean when you shout Black Power to these people back here?
I mean that they are oppressed because they are black, and their rallying cry must be Black Power, so that they can use that to ensure justice for themselves.
I feel that while believing firmly that power is necessary, that it would be difficult for me to use the phrase Black Power because of the connotative meaning that it has for many people and the feeling that this may represent a desire to rise from a position of disadvantage to one of advantage, thereby subverting justice.
It's important to understand the transition with SNCC. When Stokely became the chairman of SNCC, he had a different approach. He'd not been trained in nonviolence, and he believed in self-defense. And he was somewhat influenced by, Malcolm X, who talked about that, and also Adam Clayton Powell. Adam Clayton Powell talked about Black Power even before Stokely and others.
And it was amazing to me how after long walks he would listen to them vent, listen to all of us vent, and it was wonderful to be a fly on the wall with great patience.
She's talking about Martin Luther King. Listen.
Saying, Stokely, is it that bad? Is it that bad? But he listened, and that was when Black Power first began to emerge. And I will never forget Dr. King's face when in Greenwood we had a rally, and Willie Ricks got up and started saying Black Power. He looked like the most stricken man, but that was the first real breach in the nonviolence commitment.
Mississippi of 1964. Stokely spoke at various student-filled meetings and began soliciting door-to-door within particular neighborhoods of counties heavily populated by low-income residents of Mississippi. So now the question then becomes, to go and vote for what? And to go and vote for who? A portion of that who was known as the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, which was a newly formed political party of Democrats that consisted of both so-called white and black representatives. And despite being heavily favored publicly by way of visual images of this party being heavily campaigned by the media to the public, white Democrats of the original Dixiecrats party, along with Lyndon B. Johnson, became very aggravated and defensive and reacted in a way as if someone intruded upon their privacies of a segregated lifestyle. Then 47-year-old Fannie Lou Hamer of Montgomery County, Mississippi, at the Democratic National Convention held on August 22nd, 1964, as the vice chairperson of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. Ms. Hamer detailed some very vital information to the public that should have alarmed everyone then about the cons of the so-called Negroes' participation in a voting system that they were initially banned from.
Now, Miss Hamer is real. Is real. I'm talking about top, bottom, okay? They used her, okay? Because she was actually working. And she's going to explain that. I'm about to play that next. She's going to explain what her situation is. But I want you guys to understand something. I didn't get a chance to put what I'm about to state right here inside of this video. It came late. Anyway, as far as the permission to use it, what I wanted to show you was Miss Fannie Lou Hamer. Her case was being broadcasted live on television where people can see it, okay? And all of a sudden, President Lyndon B. Johnson just randomly, okay, says he has an announcement to make. And you know, everybody, every news station has to look at him, okay? He made up some random holiday on the spot and got the attention off of her. He didn't want nobody to hear that for a very particular reason. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, and to the Credentials Committee, my name is Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer. It was the 31st of August in 1962 that 18 of us traveled 26 miles to the county courthouse in Indianola to try to register to become first-class citizens.
Now, that's very important. To try to register to become first-class citizens. So now you see that it wasn't about race, it was about class. Class was the word, the terminology that they used. Okay? It wasn't about race. This was happening. Listen, y'all. Only a certain few went through what she went through at that time. Not everybody. And these college students, like Stokely Carmichael and all the rest of them I named that didn't live through something like what she's about to mention, just clinged onto it and used it and boosted it up as if that was happening to everybody. And it wasn't. And I'm talking about it wasn't at all on a large scale, okay? Keep in mind, those college students had to pay for college. Just like now, had to pay for college. What you gonna say? Everybody was on a scholarship? What's your excuse? Huh? You know they had money. Our families had money, okay? because they had land. And listen, watch. Let's go back just a tad bit because I want you to hear what she's saying. It's very important. Listen to what she went through. And she's real. She ain't no joke. Okay?
He owed some very vital information to the public that should have alarmed everyone then about the cons of the so-called Negroes' participation in a voting system that they were initially banned from.
Mr. Chairman, and to the Credentials Committee.
1964, y'all.
My name is Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer. It was the 31st of August in 1962 that 18 of us traveled 26 miles to the county courthouse in Indianola to try to register to become first-class citizens. And Reverend Jeff Funny carried me 4 miles in the rural area where I had worked as a timekeeper and sharecropper for 18 years. I was met there by my children that told me that
was chosen system that they were initially banned from.
My bad. Hold up.
4 miles in the rural area where I had worked as a timekeeper and sharecropper for 18 years.
I'm going to stop right there for a second and let this sink in. Just for a second. Where I worked as a timekeeper and a sharecropper this is the 60s. Listen, y'all, this ain't no joke.
I was met there by my children.
By my children. Hold on. Her children were there. Listen.
Plantation owner was angry.
Remember how they tried to say that we were separated from our families? And no, they didn't know that. Man, listen, man. Woo, they lied.
And Reverend Jeff Funny carried me 4 miles in the rural area where I had worked as a timekeeper and sharecropper for 18 years. I was met there by my children that told me the plantation owner was angry because I had gone down, tried to register. After they told me, my husband came and said the plantation owner was raising Cain because I had tried to register. And before he quit talking, the plantation owner came and said, Fannie Lou, do you know, did Cap tell you what I said? And I said, yes, sir. He said, well, I mean that if you don't go down and withdraw your registration, you will have to leave.
Okay. You'll have to leave. The plantation owner saying that. Her husband came and told her, though. So keep in mind, her whole family was there. She was a timekeeper and a sharecropper. She was doing that for 18 years. This was 1962 that she's referring to when this happened. The video that I'm showing you right there is her stating her story. I just didn't line it up with the audio. I didn't get permission to use that video, so I just showed you that that video exists, okay? I didn't get permission to use it in time. So I'm just showing you that the video exists. See how the white guy's adjusting her mic that's on her shirt? So like this was being broadcasted, okay? But the president took the attention off of this.
I had worked as a timekeeper and sharecropper for 18 years. I was met there by my children that told me the plantation owner was angry because I had gone down, tried to register. After they told me, my husband came.
My husband came.
And said the plantation owner was raising Cain because I had tried to register. And before he quit talking, the plantation owner came and said, Fannie Lou, do you know, did Cap tell you what I said? And I said, yes, sir. He said, well, I mean that if you don't go down and withdraw your registration, you will have to leave.
Now, Now, why would and what's key is, why would the plantation owner be upset that she wanted to go and register to become a first class citizen? Raising Cain out, meaning that he was upset. That's some South. That's from the South.
Now, this is why it is very essential to know your history of your own family members, because not every county of every state underwent racial discrimination, environmental racism, low-income poverty, nor racial segregation during this time period of the 1960s. Okay? In fact, many of these college students that were members of these various committees didn't experience any of these things as a child growing up and becoming young adults. What you will find is that many of these college students were well-educated followers of various religious faiths, and their parents even disagreed with them attempting to desegregate schools where so-called whites attended, and other public places didn't experience.
I meant to hit pause.
That many of these college students were well-educated followers of various religious faiths, and their parents even disagreed with them attempting to desegregate schools where so-called whites attended, and other public places that so-called Negroes didn't own or were not even a part of.
So their parents was telling them not to do this, okay? Their parents were informing the children, I don't care if you want to call them young adults, whatever, it was still their children, okay, not to do this, okay? And a form of religion influenced this to go forward. We all know what it is. We don't have to go into that. It's right in front of you.
What's also important to note here is that their parents were not struggling to the point where they couldn't afford for their children to gain a higher education. These college students were very well versed in organizing meetings, gathering funds necessary, writing public speeches for members who were speakers, and more importantly, influenced members to dare place themselves directly in the way of segregated areas across America, purposely.
When I first heard of Martin Luther King Jr. in
okay, hold on, wait. Before I play this, guys, I want you to think about this for a second. We were told that it was, well, in school, we were told that how the story went was that everybody was experiencing like a form of racism everywhere. I'm not saying that it didn't exist, but they were trying to state that it existed everywhere to a point where so-called blacks and so-called whites couldn't get along. And that's very important because it influenced an entire political campaign on both ends, okay? And it split, like it really did split us apart. Like, okay, why did we need to integrate when we had our own? And that's well known, okay, that we had our own. John Lewis is even he's gonna inform you that he was already in college, but he wanted to go to a specific college just because whites were there. Now people, the excuse is that they get a better education. That's the excuse that you say. And the crazy part about that is that everybody will lean back onto that education side and think that people are not getting taught the same thing. Like, it's the same curriculum in the education system. Like, what do you mean better education? Like, it's indoctrination one way or another. Okay.
55, when I was 15 years old, I grew up only about 50 miles from Montgomery. I had seen the signs that said white, colored, white men, white women, colored women, white waiting, colored waiting. I heard Dr. King's voice on the old radio. His words inspired me. I grew up in segregated rural Alabama, and I didn't like the signs that I saw saying white and colored. White men, white women, colored women, white waiting, colored waiting. The action of Dr. King inspired me to find a way to get in the way. I had been told by my mother, my father, my grandparents, and great-grandparents, when I would ask questions, they would say, don't get in trouble, don't get in the way. But I felt like Martin Luther King Jr. was speaking directly to me, saying, John Robert Lewis, you too can do something.
Come on, like, hold on. Like,
so in 1957,
but I felt like Martin Luther King was speaking directly to me, but your parents was telling you not to do it. Don't get in the way. Like, and then they forewarned you what was going to happen. And you still do it anyway. But see, keep in mind, he's a child, basically. So what do you know, look.
At the age of 17.
You couldn't manipulate the adults. You can only manipulate the children. That's why they were focused on the children so much, even during slavery. I keep telling y'all.
I wrote Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. a letter. I didn't tell my mother, my father, any of my sisters, or brothers, or teachers. I wanted to attend a little college 10 miles from my home called Troy State College. I applied to go there, submitted my application, my high school transcript. So I wrote this letter. Dr. King wrote me back and sent me a round-trip Greyhound bus ticket and invited me to come to Montgomery to meet with him. So in September 1957, I boarded a bus. I traveled from Troy, Alabama, rural Alabama, past Montgomery to Nashville to go to school. An uncle of mine gave me a $100 bill, more money than I ever had. Gave me a Foot Locker, put everything that I own, my few books, my few clothing in that Foot Locker, and took a Greyhound bus to Nashville. And while I was there studying, Rosa Parks came to speak at Fisk University. And I heard her. I met her. And Dr. King later heard from one of my teachers that I was in Nashville studying. So Martin Luther King Jr. got back in touch with me and told me when I was home for spring break to come and see him. So in March of 1958, by this time I'm 18 years old, I boarded a bus.
By that time, he was 18 years old when he boarded this bus. But prior to that, he was still even younger, okay? So 16 years old, he trying to get in contact with Martin Luther King. I hope you guys understand this, okay? He was still a child.
I traveled from Troy to Montgomery. And a young lawyer by the name of Fred Gray, who was a lawyer for Rosa Parks, for Dr. King, and the people involved in the Montgomery bus boycott, met me at the Greyhound bus station and drove me to the First Baptist Church in downtown Montgomery, pastored by the Reverend Ralph Abernathy, and ushered me into the pastor's study. I saw Martin Luther King Jr. and Ralph Abernathy standing behind a desk. I was so scared, I didn't know what to say or what to do. And Dr. King said, "Are you the boy from Troy? Are you John Lewis?" And I said, "Dr. King, I am John Robert Lewis, but he still called me the boy from Troy." And he said, "You know, if you want to go to Troy State College, we will support you. We may have to sue the state of Alabama. We may have to sue Troy State, but we're prepared to help you. Go back home and have a discussion with your mother, your father. You know, your home could be bombed. That's what he said. Your home could be burned.
Listen.
Your family could lose their land.
You could, hold on. Just stop. Just stop. Why? Well, okay. Martin Luther King. Listen, Martin, him. If you know this is what's going to happen, why are you telling children this? That's pressed to see you, and they probably not going, they already know their mother and father going to say no. They not about to go back and be like, Mom, Dad, look, hey man, we might lose everything, but I want to help Martin Luther King. I want to help y'all. Listen. I'm saying a whole lot without saying a lot. I'm telling you. Because I'm going to release a video on this. And, yeah, get ready. I know it's going, like I said, it's going to hurt some people's feelings. I can tell you that. But Martin Luther King figured it out late, too late. He did figure it out, but it was late. Well, he did figure it out. He did. That's why they came after him, because he figured it out.
You could be beaten. You could be harmed. And I went back, had a discussion with my mother and my father.
And they
were so afraid that something could happen to me, it could happen to them, or we could lose the land, lose the farm. So they didn't want to have anything to do with my attempting to enroll at the school.
When you are that age, you don't feel powerful. I remember realizing that with what we were doing, trying to abolish segregation, we were coming up against governors of southern states, judges, politicians.
Trying to abolish segregation. Now think about that, y'all. If we ever wanted to point out a problem, how come we ain't never point that one out? Like, just imagine that. What if we continued to be segregated? But we can live amongst each other, but continue to be segregated. Just imagine that. Like, I'm just, now, just imagine that now. If we continued to be segregated, what would have happened? Because, of course, we integrated. Imagine that. We had everything on our own. See, this is the reason why I said, look, we don't need nobody. We could do it for ourselves. We don't need their awards. We don't need their cars. We don't need their buildings. We don't need their government. We don't need none of that. None of it. We could do it on our own. That's what I'm saying. This is my message to my people. Wake up! You know that political game is a political game.
Politicians, businessmen. And I remember thinking, I'm only 22 years old. What do I?
She only 22. It's game over. She only 22. What she's referred to, she was only 22. She don't know nothing. She had to get taught by other people. So yes, she could be easily influenced, just like all the rest of them that were a part of that society, or those societies or organizations that they created as college students, children. That's what they considered you.
I know. What am I doing?
The land, so they didn't want to have anything to do with my attempting to enroll at the school.
When you are that age, you don't feel powerful. I remember realizing that with what we were doing, trying to abolish segregation, we were coming up against governors of southern states, judges, politicians, businessmen. And I remember thinking, I'm only 22 years old. What do I know? What am I doing? And I felt very vulnerable. So when we heard these newscasts that other cities were having demonstrations, it really helped.
Well, when it really helped that they heard the news, they heard about other people doing the same thing by way of the news. What does that sound like? Let's just take, for example, the Black Lives Matter people, right? Okay. They see a few people doing a few things that influence a few people to go down there and they cause commotion. It's the same. Hello. It's not hard.
And it was very important.
The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was enacted by the 88th U.S. Congress and then signed into law by then President Lyndon B. Johnson on July 2nd, 1964.
And he's the president that wanted to shut up Fannie Lou Hamer. And then he turned around and signed the Civil Rights. You got to look at what happened. Now you know that wasn't for you. He was about segregation. He wanted to continue segregation. By the way,
this bill was said to have been one of the weakest links in the power structure for equal rights concerning voter registration requirements, employment discrimination, and segregation in schools and other public places. In reaction to this Civil Rights Act bill, and with the loss to the Democrat Party preventing a new Democratic desegregated party from being accepted by the Democratic National Convention, from March 7th, 1965 to...
Okay, the reason why I wanted to stop right there and point that out, that's what we another mistake that was done. Latching ourselves on to the Democrats. Like, they just used you. Like,
March 25th.
They used you to empower themselves, man.
Discrimination and segregation in schools
and no, I'm not
other
a Democrat nor Republican.
In reaction to this Civil Rights Act bill, and with the loss to the Democrat Party preventing a new Democratic desegregated party from being accepted by the Democratic National Convention, from March 7th, 1965 to March 25th, 1965, 3 organizations decided to conduct a protest demonstration to draw awareness towards so-called Negroes wanting to exercise their constitutional right to vote. It was called the March from Selma to Montgomery.
Now, what's important to note is that Martin Luther King was promoting that, you know, voting Democrat stuff and all that too. But Malcolm X wasn't, okay? So I want to point that out. Malcolm X was totally against that. And as you should be, like, because what the hell? Like, no. He was absolutely correct on that.
During this said march that lasted a total of 18 days, the 3 organizations that conducted and participated in this march were members of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the Dallas County Voters League, along with members of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee.
Another subdivision
during the second to the last day of the march, on March 23rd, 1965, a few SNCC members like Stokely Carmichael and Willie Ricks, for example, chose to abandon the march from Selma to Montgomery upon reaching Lowndes County, Alabama. Speaking to the local residents of the town, and then orchestrating a meeting with a member of the organization called the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights by the name of John Hewlett, who was also a former member of the NAACP subdivision in Alabama. Stokely Carmichael, John Hewlett, William Ricks, and other SNCC members created a brand new independent political party known as the Black Panther Party in March of 1965.
It's the very first Black Panther Party. Not to be confused with
Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale's Black Panther Party that was adopted a year or two ago. John Hewlett, William Ricks, and other SNCC members created a brand new independent political party known as the Black Panther Party in March of 1965. Not to be confused with Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale's Black Panther Party that was adopted a year or two later by SNCC. This initial Black Panther Party was officially known as the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, or
they had the Black
LCFO for short.
This was Stokely Carmichael's group that did this, y'all.
So during the James Meredith precedent, Stokely Carmichael and William Ricks and other members of SNCC and the Black Panther Party were met face to face with the golden opportunity of a lifetime, which was to be able to finally flip the narrative from Dr. King's nonviolent approach with freedom now to Stokely Carmichael's borrowed slogan, Black Power. While James Meredith was in the hospital, Stokely Carmichael met with Martin Luther King Jr., Floyd McKissick, and others, where they vowed to continue Meredith's march. And so the one-man march then became the March Against Fear. Having gained the media attention by aligning himself with Dr. King publicly during the march, just 10 days after the James Meredith precedent, on June 16, 1966, Stokely Carmichael purposely got himself arrested by police for trespassing on private property of the university. It was said that after immediately upon being released from police custody hours later, Stokely was instructed by William Ricks to give his Black Power speech in front of young students and the press in Greenwood, Mississippi, where he was quoted stating the following.
Now, I had this audio, but I couldn't get permission to use it. I don't know who has the rights, and I don't want to just put it up. But I got this audio, so I just quoted it.
The 27th time I have been arrested, and I ain't going to jail no more. The only way we gonna stop them white men from whooping us is to take over. What we gotta start saying now is Black Power.
Listen.
To use the term Black Power, SNCC had already decided this before the march. It must be properly.
Listen, he snitched on himself, y'all. Listen closely.
To use the term Black Power, SNCC had already decided this before the march. It must be properly understood. We decided to use the march for an education purpose. Number one, we wanted to push strongly our struggle against the war in Vietnam. So if people look clearly at the Meredith March, you will see anti-Vietnam propping up here. King wasn't using it then, but you will see this is one of the areas where we started to hit him with it seriously. Our march was to put strong nationalism in, to have direct leadership from us, and of course, to throw our Black Power for the mass of the people. Now, I myself have been in Greenwood, Mississippi since early '60. I'd worked in the project there, and when head of the second congressional district, this was our base. So I had spent time in the jail in Greenwood so many times. The police knew me, the police chief knew me, everyone in the town knew me. So
the police chief, he said, why did he have to point that out?
We started to hit him with it seriously. Our march was to put strong nationalism in, to have direct leadership from us, and of course, to throw our Black Power for the mass of the people. Now, I myself had been in Greenwood, Mississippi since early '60. I'd worked in the project there, and when head of the second congressional district, this was our base. So I had spent time in the jail in Greenwood so many times. The police knew me, the police chief knew me, everyone in the town knew me. So we decided Greenwood, it was SNCC's strongest base in the Delta. We couldn't go wrong. Unfortunately for the police, we went to set up some tents there, and the police decided to arrest me. Okay, so before I was arrested, we were discussing Greenwood. This is where we will launch Black Power.
Hold up.
This is
what?
Propping up here. King wasn't using it. Now, I myself had been in Greenwood, Mississippi since early '60. I'd worked in the project there, and when head of the second congressional district, this was our base. So I had spent time in the jail in Greenwood so many times. The police knew me, the police chief knew me, everyone in the town knew me. So we decided Greenwood, it was SNCC's strongest base in the Delta. We couldn't go wrong. Unfortunately for the police, we went to set up some tents there.
Unfortunately for the police?
And the police decided to arrest me.
And the police decided to arrest him?
Okay, so before I was arrested, we were discussing Greenwood. This is where we will launch Black Power.
Oh, man. Listen.
So when I got arrested, Ricks was on the side there when the police said, "Let them arrest you. We'll get you out of jail and you come out and make the speech tonight." And he disappeared. Well, you know how Rick speaks. So,
hello? It was all set up.
Anyway, I went to jail, but I was brought out, and when I was released, it was at night, the speech was going on, and when I came to the speech, I wasn't lying. Ricks came back, he said, "We have everything prepared, we're ready for Black Power, we've spoke about it all day, we've primed up the people, and luckily for us, our biggest problem was Martin Luther King. Because I knew that once Black Power was said, Martin Luther King would have to come, not fight against it, but would his best try to give reasonings to water it down. But luckily for us, the night in Greenwood, King had to go to do a taped television thing, I think, for Meet the Press. So he had to go to Memphis. So he was not there the night in Greenwood. Ricks had everybody primed. He said, "Just get to your speech. We're going against freedom now. We're going for Black Power. Don't hit too much on freedom now, but hit the need for power." So we built up on the need for...
So he's letting you know that they flipped the script when everybody thought that King was supposed to be there basically to talk about the freedom now. They were able to implement, and this was in front of college students. Keep that in mind. He was on campus. Listen, y'all. Listen.
Fight against it, but would his best try to give reasonings to water it down. But luckily for us, the night in Greenwood, King had to go to do a taped television thing, I think, for Meet the Press. So he had to go to Memphis. So he was not there the night in Greenwood. Ricks had everybody primed. He said, "Just get to your speech. We're going against freedom now. We're going for Black Power. Don't hit too much on freedom now, but hit the need for power." So we built up on the need for power. And just when I got there, before I got it, Ricks was there saying, "Hit him now, hit him now." And I kept saying, "Give me time, give me time." When we finally got him, we dropped it, Black Power. Of course, they had been primed, and they responded immediately. But I myself, to be honest, I didn't expect that enthusiastic response, you know? And the enthusiastic response obviously not only shocked me, but gave me more energy to carry it on further. By the time we got down that night, SCLC was running around everywhere. We knew it was finished. We had made our victory. They could not bring it back. It was over.
We had made our victory. They could not bring it back. It was over.
You know, and the enthusiastic response shocked me, but to
God.
Many people were opposed to Stokely's motives and agendas, calling him radical and militant. In fact, SNCC itself was established under the principles of nonviolence by so-called blacks and so-called whites. And that fact becomes quite obvious when taking a look at SNCC's logo alone. But once Stokely gained control over SNCC as the chairman, the once Jamaican immigrant that lived amongst the whites during his childhood.
Now, the reason why, okay, my wife and I wrote this. Hi, baby. We found two different things. We found a discrepancy. Now, as far as Jamaican and Trinidad. So we said both. We said Trinidad earlier and Jamaican late because we have documents on both. Put it like that. This is another reason why you could tell he was a plant. Like they were able to hide certain things about him. And he's not the only one.
Began purge.
But we said Trinidadian first, okay? Due to certain things that they mentioned, but we do have both.
All of SNCC's non-colored members one by one.
The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee that had been on the front line, the shock troops of the civil rights movement, led by a coalition of young white and black students, North and South. Stokely Carmichael gets control of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating and literally does what I call the Soviet Union's done. He purges the organization of all white people.
So it got rid of the white folks.
Give a damn how dedicated you were. If you were
Keep
white
in mind the white folks
and you
was
were in the
there.
Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee when Stokely Carmichael came in, he said, you go back and work in your community. We want to have total control, black power. That was a very destructive move. And it had consequences that rippled throughout the movement.
Stokely set out to raise awareness of wanting so-called black power by appearing in...
If white folks was there and they established it together, okay, on top of other college college students, like societies or organizations they created, if white folks was there for integration, that leads us to another key factor here. Okay? They needed our help. To get off our own land so they could bring in more of them. When they used the vote, it's about to go right into it, actually. When they used the vote
to do it. A very destructive move. And it had consequences that rippled throughout the movement.
Stokely set out to raise awareness of wanting so-called black power by appearing in various meetings where the press were present and by soliciting door-to-door, enticing the poor people residing in Mississippi to go register and vote.
How you doing, Ms. Huns?
Fine.
How's everything going?
It's fine.
Good. I want to talk to you a little about, May 3rd, what we're going to do. So Logan, who's running against Mr. Favors for sheriff, and we'll pick one of them. And if we get one of those candidates picked, then on November 8th, their names will go on the ballot box and we'll vote on the list for Black Panther. So in November, okay, well, you know what we're going to do on May 3rd?
Oh, I think so.
What are we going to do on May 3rd?
We going over and try to get organized. Ready for November election, is that right?
Now we can vote for our people, because we have to use our vote to get out the cotton fields.
That's right.
And we can't get out the cotton field voting for the boss, man.
That's right.
We got to vote for people who've been in the cotton fields like ourselves, and they're the ones who are going to bring us out the cotton field.
And he ain't never been in no cotton field. What is he talking about? He ain't never been in no cotton field. You acting like you know what you talking about. You don't know what you talking about. You were in a Jewish community in New York. What are you talking about? Cotton field. What you know about that?
Yes, you've been hearing what everybody's been saying about us across the country. Have you heard what they said? Now, the law says that you can't vote in ours and also vote in the Democratic primary, which has to be held on the same day, according to the law. So that what we'll have to do is vote on one and not the other. So if you want to vote for our candidates for sheriff, for tax assessor, tax collector, coroner, and the school board, then you have to vote for us. If not, you can vote for governor and for the same people in the Democratic Party.
Being just a year older in age than Stokely Carmichael, SCLC's staff leader, Bernard Lafayette, shares a very important message concerning the term black itself, and how many people were opposed to its usage amongst the so-called Negroes during that time period.
Now, when I was growing up, to call a person of color, like myself or others, black, was considered derogatory. That's just a fact. You know, you call somebody black, those were fighting words. Those were fighting words.
And see, and he's not an immigrant, okay? Now, you know, of course they would consider, you know, his basically Stokely as like an immigrant. They would still consider him an immigrant. But I want you to understand that he was growing up just a year older than Stokely. He was growing up, and others during that time period, okay, indicating that the term black was derogatory. Bernard Lafayette is not the only one that has mentioned that. That's why a lot of people didn't get along with joining the Black Panther Party. They didn't like that term black at all. And keep in mind, these people were of the same age, basically within the same. So it's a lot of discrepancies going on, especially when you have somebody that hasn't been in the South speaking for the South as if they were there.
So what was going on here was that the college students were manipulated by Stokely Carmichael and many of his closest colleagues to believe that the use of the term black is highlighting their group of people by way of their skin complexions, inadvertently grouping themselves into a mental status structure that not only bears negative connotation, but more importantly, it also makes them null and void or non-existent when it comes to law of the American government.
You shouldn't use the term black. That's why I hate using it in the title, but you pay attention to it.
Believing firmly that power is necessary, that it would be difficult for me to use the phrase black power because of the connotative meaning that it has for many people.
The majority of the people that were
associated, let you know that people weren't agreeing with that.
With campaigning black power to these students did not relate to any struggles with poverty and or direct racial discrimination personally. So this exposes why someone needed to negate Dr. King's Freedom Now movement and transition the public's attention to a black power campaign, revealing that the campaign's method was politically used for the purpose to mentally and emotionally target only the Nijis of Turtle Island for self-degradation and self-condemnation, which makes things even deeper. Because we can now determine without a doubt that Stokely and his fellow colleagues were set to breach the
believing
not only bears negative connotation, but more importantly, it also makes them null and void or non-existent when it comes to law of the American government.
I feel that while believing firmly that power is necessary, that it would be difficult for me to use the phrase black power because of the connotative meaning that it has for many people.
The majority of the people that were associated with campaigning black power to these students did not relate to any struggles with poverty and or direct racial discrimination personally. So this exposes why someone needed to negate Dr. King's Freedom Now movement and transition the public's attention to a black power campaign, revealing that the campaign's method was politically used for the purpose to mentally and emotionally target only the Nijis of Turtle Island for self-degradation and self-condemnation, which makes things even deeper, because we can now determine without a doubt that Stokely and his fellow colleagues were set to breach the Niji civil rights movement that was currently underway, steering the main attention away from unity, human rights, and nonviolence.
Yeah, so I just told you the infiltration, okay? And it's not a joke, guys. I know for certain people, that's a hard pill to swallow, okay? But that is the absolute truth. Absolute truth. The only discrepancy that we have is the firm origin of where he came from. Like, meaning it could have been, like I said, we see Jamaican and Trinidad. We see both, okay? But everything else is top to bottom accurate. Top to bottom. He infiltrated the civil rights movement, period. And I'm going to tell you, well, I mean, basically, you already see that the civil rights movement had all to do with integration, with desegregation. And that's where the problem resides. And still to this very day, by the way, we have to, and I'm going to point this out. Like I said, I understand that Dr. King did many great things, okay? I'm not taking anything from him. In fact, I can state for sure, okay, that he did, like what you would say, wake up, okay, like the last years of his life. And that's the reason why they came after him. Because of that, because he flipped the script. He was on a script, and I'm going to expose what that script is. And I'm going to expose his entire agenda and who was in charge of it, okay, and what their agenda was, the people that were in charge. And it does involve other people that we put in the limelight similar to him. Because you got to understand, we didn't put these people in the limelight. Or did we? Now, yeah, that's right. That's the reason why they shot Martin Luther King up, because he flipped the script coming after that check. Because it was more than just that check. He pointed out the fact that the lands were stolen. The lands were stolen. Basically, they manipulated you using your own people to take everything that you had. And by the time he found out that he led his people to a burning house, literally, it was too late. But people weren't listening to him the last years of his life. King was getting it all out. And to a point where if certain things that were not recorded, meaning they weren't recorded by newspaper, like so-called white owners of newspaper companies, and so-called black owners of black-owned, newspaper companies, they purposely did not report a lot of things that he was mentioning. And like, for example, the video that you see right now on YouTube of Martin Luther King stating that he's coming to get that check, that was leaked. That was a leak. That wasn't even supposed to come out. People were not supposed to hear him talk like that. They really tried to hide that, put that under the radar. That actually got leaked by way of a documentary that was on Amazon for a while now. Like, it was on Amazon Prime. I forgot the name of it, but it was dealing with Martin Luther King, and it's a very good documentary. It's like 3 hours long or something like that. I don't know if it's still there or not, actually. It should be. Amazon usually keep their stuff up, and Netflix be flipping it up. But that it was a very good documentary, and that part leaked, and it was also showcasing, I can tell you, it was also showcasing the conditions of certain people that he was trying to reach out to, so-called black and white, by the way, to check their living conditions. And that's why, you know, you saw him lead the Poor People's Campaign. But that inadvertently allowed him to do more research on the Homestead Acts, all of them. And he was trying to tell you what happened and how they took the land. Now, I mentioned this in a different video. I know I've been live streaming for a while about the Homestead Acts, and maybe I will come back and talk about that more, so you could see, you know, what was done by way of paperwork as well, because it was more than one thing that happened. But I'm just leaning as far as how our lands were stolen. But the acres and acres and acres and acres and acres of land that our ancestors own. And this is the reason why I tell you to do your genealogy, because everybody's situation is different, and you need to know what happened to your family, because you need to see if your family owned land, because if they did, you need to get it back. You need to get it back. The only reason why these foreigners are excelling is because they are on our lands. We are the landlords. They are the tenants. It's time for them to pay rent. We don't even need a check from the government. They need to be paying us. Okay. It's so, we don't even, a matter of fact, it's so many different things I could say right here. I just got hype. I said some things I didn't mean to say, because I know that was confusing. What I'm trying to say is, I get so hyped when I think about this idea that we go back to segregation ourselves, and we have everything on our own. And I'm just saying, the idea in my head is I'm seeing all the cities again, all the towns again, where we had the palaces and castles and horses, and we were looking, this is what was going, it was going on already before these foreigners got here. We already had this on lock. We need to get back to this. They admit this in their documents. They had to copy a form of government from our ancestors because they didn't know how to survive. We had to teach them. And we had to teach them about land management. And that's what Martin Luther King was trying to tell you. And y'all didn't listen. He was trying to tell you. At the very same time that they refused to give the Negro any land, through an act of Congress, our government was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that it was willing to undergird its white peasants from Europe with an economic floor. That's Martin Luther King. You got to listen to what he's saying. He's telling you what happened. I'm not making this up. And neither is he. And neither are other people that's pointing this out, that's out there. And I really appreciate that. I really appreciate all of you that share this message to try to get our people to understand what happened to us, versus them taking it to some book and religiously followed by somebody else's traditions that had nothing to do with their ancestors, period, especially if it's only reporting back to one book. Yes, I took a shot because I need you to wake up. I need you to really pay attention to what happened to us. Stop that 5,000, 6,000 year old stuff. Listen to what this government is brand new. Like, this is 245 years of this government. Listen, guys, that's not a lot. That's not a lot. And if they could tell you that your ancestors came from Africa, then your record should be able to go back that far too. Otherwise, their speech won't be creditable to begin with. So yes, the records do go back far enough for you to understand that you did not come from Africa. No matter if you gravitated towards that information that these Stokely Carmichaels and all the rest of these people made viral and made money off of that in the 60s, basically. You know, that's a hustle. That's a street hustle. That's what that was. Y'all clinged on to it like another religion. Let it go. Wake up now. Our people need to come together. And that's what we need, literally. We need our own of everything. It's not about buy black. We could buy into ourselves. We literally could start our own thing, top, bottom, government-wise. And I'm talking about industry, everything we want. We don't got to keep crying to this government for some help, and they ain't doing nothing year after year. They ain't doing nothing for us. We already came to them for reparations. They know they owe. But you think they don't? They know they owe. But they know how they took the lands. That's why you know how it was taken was all fraudulent. So, all right, okay. We ain't got to cause no war or commotion. All right, if it's going to be like that here, you have yours, we have ours. But let's be real about who own what. Because, like, you know you ain't owning nothing on my land. Let's go. I'm not telling you to stop your religious beliefs. I'm not that type of person. Whatever you believe in, fine. It's about what you know. So now you know. I informed you that the civil rights movement was infiltrated. And I'm going to show you what the civil rights movement was about as well. And I'm going to show you how it's all political to manipulate the mindsets of the people. These were children that gravitated towards that word black because black never had any right in the government. Nowhere. Not that term at all. Neither did African American. Nowhere. No legislation. Nowhere near to be found. Okay? Stop calling yourself these. They're also derogative, but they're also misnomers. It has nothing to do with you. Okay? You have a right, a human right, as soon as you're born, number one. But the civil rights that they were looking for was political. Okay? But we could tell who it benefited right now. We don't have to guess. So we know that our people, our young children, were manipulated into thinking that it was going to benefit them to become a first-class citizen by way of voter registration to go register and vote for a company, or a society that's up under another society that never had their best interests in mind for you, the Democratic Party. Okay? Look, come on, y'all. Now, I don't got to use, no cuss words or nothing like that to let you know that I'm standing firm on everything that I'm saying right now, okay? And I'm telling you with all complete facts that I'm not making nothing up that I just said. We need to do, that's what we need to do. If you're looking for Dane Calloway to state, okay, Dane, what do we need to do? I just told you, and I'm going to keep telling you, we need to set up our own. We were successful doing that already. Remember, that don't mean we got to stop. Shout out to Tulsa, Oklahoma. Shout out to many other places that were so-called the Negro Wall Streets. They were dubbed as the Negro Wall Streets, not the Black Wall Streets, the Negro Wall Streets. And that was everywhere. South Carolina. Well, North Carolina was the first one. Durham, North Carolina was the first one. It wasn't Tulsa, Oklahoma. It was Durham. Go back. I went there and showed you on screen. I ain't just go to Virginia. I do this for real. And this for my people, and I'm not playing. Let me calm down. Y'all gonna learn. And I'm gonna continuously do what I'm doing for my people, because we need this now. We all over this. This ours. They can't hide this no more. Whether if you want to call us indigenous, aboriginal, copper-colored, you know that we original to this land. And stop trying to make you think that you came from a whole nother continent, because there wasn't even enough white folks to make that happen. That's an all fantasy game that you fell for. Wake up now. Let's get this land back. I thank y'all for coming out. I'm going to calm down before my wife call me and tell me to calm down. But y'all know I'm not playing. I'm going to see y'all soon. What up?